All right. For those of you who are still trickling in and those who have been here for the past minute or so, just having a nice chat with me, Maya, Tony, and the rest of the Elevation team, thank you all so much for attending and welcome to session 2 on day 1 of EL Impact. This is social emotional learning with ELs during remote learning with John Seidlitz. I wanted to just run through a couple brief pieces of housekeeping before we get started and then pass it on to our CEO and co-founder, Jordan Moranis, who will be introducing John. This session is being recorded right now, and a recording will be sent to all attendees and folks who have registered for the session. You all also have your audio and video off by default. So if you're wondering if you can be seen or if you can talk, that is a setting that has been turned off by default with our Zoom webinar system. So don't worry, nothing wrong on your end there. We will have the opportunity, both at certain points in this presentation at the end, for some questions. There are 2 ways that you can surface those questions. One, just in the chat to just interact with each other. We recommend that's more just a conversational avenue to react to what you're seeing and just coordinate with each other and chat with each other a bit. There is also a Q&A feature where you can document specific questions that we will hope to get to at the end of the session, and that our Elevation team will be monitoring both the chat and the Q&A, and we'll try and get to as many of your questions as possible. But with these being very, very popular sessions, we're probably not going to be able to get to everyone's today. I'd also like to just take this brief opportunity to shout out that you can find us on social media if you haven't already, at Elevation Ed, ELLEVATION Ed. That's on Twitter and Instagram, and our Facebook page, Elevation Education. I'm going to pass it off to Elevation CEO and co-founder, Jordan Moranis, who will introduce John and say a few words before we get started here. So take it away, Jordan.
Hey, everybody. I am excited to be here, and it's awesome to see now nearly 350 participants already on this, gathered for this event. Most of you probably have some sense that John is an awesome presenter and does a great job in these types of forums. And so I am thrilled not only to be able to introduce him, but to sit in myself and learn. So the topic for today is social emotional learning. John is a longtime both speaker and consultant. He founded an organization that is one of the most kind of prominent and requested organizations for speaking and writing and teaching on all facets and topics around English learners. John's been a teacher. He was an administrator in Region 20 in Texas. And I got to know John because of the work that Elevation was doing in Texas. And I still remember that I was in Plano, Texas on the same day that John was doing some training, and he invited me and a couple of others to sit in. And as we were always kind of thinking, how can we get a really critical mass of educators in any district that has Elevation in the room together? And then we walk in, and John has like 3 days with all of the administrators across the entire district. And at one point, John, whose content was so well received, said something about identifying students who have not met certain progress indicators over the course of a year, and asked those in attendance to go back and kind of find that data and then kind of match that up with some of the teaching he had done. And afterwards, John and I had the opportunity to say that his teaching and all of the professional development that he is providing marries up beautifully in a district that has Elevation, where anyone in that district could have just opened up Elevation, found that data, and been in a better position to do the work and make meaning of what John was teaching at that time. And since then, we've had the opportunity to co-host different things, to co-lead different things, to have John as a guest on our podcast and vice versa. And so the professional relationship with John in Texas and beyond has been great. So I'm going to turn things over to John. There might be a couple of moments during the conversation where I kind of speak up, might ask John a question or two, and we'll try to make this as interactive as we can. So welcome, John.
Thank you, Jordan. I do remember that day in Plano when we first met, and I remembered just the great impression that you guys made on me and your passion to work with English language learners. And that was before we had the awesome Highest Aspirations podcast and all the other cool things that y'all are doing that are, and the lists of all the different stuff. I really enjoyed I miss seeing you guys at conferences though. I have to take back something Jordan said though, which is, he said, I'm good in this venue. I still am not used to it. I know we've been doing this since March. I miss you guys so much. I miss seeing you teachers, being face-to-face, just being together. And I know that there's some advantages to this, but I just wish I was in a room with all 300 of you, and then afterwards could just sit and chat afterwards and just talk and hang out. And I miss all of that. And I know we all do. And I think, but I will do my best. I definitely will do my best today because it's such a really important topic. It's so important, I made you a Padlet. So I'm gonna paste this into the chat. And if you could please just make sure you can click on that and get to it. I'm gonna turn off the chat here. I've just learned from presenting in this venue that my severe unmedicated ADD and the chat don't go well. And so I'm actually, Jordan, if there's something really crucial, like people can't get into stuff or something's not working, then we will.
We're all over that.
Thank you. Yeah, just let me know so we can do it that way. So if for some reason you cannot get into the Padlet, please let me know. There's what the Padlet should look like. And I'm going to just say over and over, it's in the Padlets and it's in the Padlet, so I don't have to keep kind of clicking back and forth throughout the session that we're going to have together today. So we'll start off with a little Dwight Schrute. Good morning, students. Today we will continue our lesson on social skills. Okay, it's been quite an adjustment to all of us. I was just been so surprised since now, we're all in different places in different states, but in Texas, we've gone to, a lot of the schools have gone to mask education. And my kids are in well, except for the one who's home sick today, they're in mask to mask school right now. And it's not the same. It's still the same, but it's still not the same. It's been hard, I think, on our students. It's hard on all of us trying to, through both, some schools are using plexiglass and masks, and you have beginning newcomer ELs, and we're trying to do comprehensible input and understand pronunciation. This has been a big challenge, but I don't think it's just a cognitive challenge. I think more than anything, it's been a social and an emotional challenge for us. And some of us are rising to the occasion and doing amazing things, but none of us are rising as high as we should be. We don't want to pretend this is easy. But I'd like to share with you, to start off, a story about a teacher. And some of you may have seen her before. She has a Leading ELs Facebook page. Her name is Pam Broussard, and she's a very good friend of mine. And she teaches in Cy-Fair ISD, which is kind of in the Houston area. Well, it was funny because Pam and I were talking, and she's a very, very positive person. I don't want to throw her under the bus here with what I'm about to say, but she's a really, really positive person. But I remember having this conversation with her, and it was just one day was not really positive. And it was in the middle of this. And I was asking her, can she do a keynote or something with us? And she said, John, I don't want to do anything right now. I'm just trying to survive. I just feel really scared. And I said, Pam, what are you scared of? And she said, I'm scared of getting sick, John. I mean, this is real for me. This is real for us teachers. We're going back to school and we don't know if we're getting sick, and this is stressful. And I'm having people that are, and this was Pam. I've known her for 3 years, never ever says anything. And I hope I'm not throwing her under the bus here. Pam, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, but I'm prefacing this story because I don't want you to think of Pam as just the absolute perfect person sitting out there in perfect teacher, because what she did here, the story I'm going to share with you, I think, is a real example of social emotional learning in practice. And social emotional learning is, first of all, about us as teachers and what we're doing, that we have to model that. And what she really modeled was listening, because when the student that's here, that's represented by this picture, was named Leticia, and she was from Juarez, Mexico, which is right by El Paso, if we have any El Paso people here. But she's in Houston and was working with this student, and the student had been there a year and a half, is at intermediate approaching advanced proficiency, and was really, really struggling when COVID started. Now, before that, she was thriving. She was moving forward in English proficiency. She'd become the president of their, they called it I think it's called the EL Leadership Club that they have there, which was like a global leaders club, I think they called it, where they basically, where ELs were in leadership positions of service in the community. She was in soccer, really doing well, getting good grades. When COVID started, the first thing that Pam noticed was sometimes she wasn't showing up. Sometimes she was just disengaged, not turning in work, not connecting with her teachers, not doing well. So she started to initiate a conversation first with Leticia and then with Leticia's mom. And what she realized was Leticia was slipping through the cracks. And Leticia wasn't the only student that she had who was slipping through the cracks. So she just realized she needed to step up her game. And what she did was first thing was she scheduled some private time, Zoom time with Leticia, and found out that Leticia was depressed and that she was suffering from depression and she was feeling isolated and alone. And she started to help her to just get some help with that. But in addition to that, she helped her with two things that you see come up a lot in social emotional learning. One of them is goal setting. She taught Leticia, you're not sunk yet. Leticia was saying, I guess the best I can do now, maybe I'll join the army. I'm not gonna go to college. I can't go to college now. My grades are bad. It was like everything, she was catastrophizing. And she helped her to set some micro goals and some long-term goals, helping her to see what she could do. Another thing that she did with Leticia was she taught her to advocate for herself. She was telling her, look, when you were in school and we talked about, we had tutoring and we had all these things are still here in our online environment. But we need to get you to contact your math teacher and talk to them saying, I don't understand. I need your help. I'm not getting this. I need this resource in Spanish. Where can I find this? I don't understand this. And teaching her to advocate for herself, because she was never the kind of ESL teacher that would go run to the math teacher and complain. She was the one that you go and help yourself was her philosophy of getting ELs, especially adolescent ELs she works with, to advocate for themselves. Well, she started doing a little better. It wasn't like road peaches and roses, but she started doing a little better when she was at home. But when they've come back to the mass school, slowly she's seen her start doing better. And she's not up where she was before, but she's functional in school. She's doing better. She's participating again. And she's a lot happier now that she's where she is now. And importantly, she's deepened her skills of self-advocacy. And she's also realized, I can get through this. And it's really not just Leticia that's realized that, it's also Pam who's realized, I can get through this. And I think one of the things we're learning about this social emotional learning during COVID is that this has been really, really tough for us. And Pam, I want to think about Leticia's situation with her math teacher with a statistic here. Some of you might know Emily Francis, but she had shared with me a story that she had with one of her math teachers in high school, where she was trying to learn just a way to communicate and talk, and she has practiced. And so one of her friends, she still doesn't know if the friend was teasing her, giving her a hard time, but taught her the phrase, I know nothing. That phrase, I know nothing, to say. If you don't know what the teacher's saying, just say, I know nothing. And she remembers she was a sophomore, had just gotten here to the United States from Central America, sophomore, and she was there, and she said, teacher called on her and she said, I know nothing. And the teacher said, you don't know anything? What do you mean you don't know anything? And he used the opportunity to just really shame her in front of the other kids and she still, it still stings, but she said that it moved in her an idea, I want to succeed just to show this guy who I can be. It was like a seminal moment for her. But not everybody has that reaction to being shamed. Well, here's a statistic. This comes from Brene Brown in a talk she shared in Austin at South by Southwest in 2017. And it's really unforgettable to me because she shared that 85% of kids, if we ask adults, if I polled all of you listening right now, you could probably remember this moment. 85% of us remember a moment when we were shamed in school, where we felt intense feelings of anxiety and shame in school. And I think about situations I remember my own. I won't give you the whole story, but I remember it ended with this teacher when I was in 6th grade saying, must I go on? Must I go on? In front of the whole class. And I was like, don't go on. It's just this moment of just feeling trapped. And I think that this happens a lot of times with our English learners, and working with them with these social emotional skills is not optional, because sometimes we're not trying to shame them. We're really not. I can think of moments when I first started teaching, and when I first started teaching middle school, I used sarcasm because I thought that I was going to be cool with the kids and just enjoy being with them. But I remember sometimes, and even I spoke Spanish, so I would speak Spanish sometimes with the kids. And I remember a kid, and he was like, please don't speak Spanish with me right now because I know English enough, right? And I was like, I'm sorry, I did not mean to hurt. I wasn't trying to do this. I was not trying to shame you, but sometimes we are that teacher that embarrasses kids. And I learned I don't use sarcasm. And I learned to find out when I'm in a mixed setting what's appropriate with language use and support for kids. It doesn't humiliate them. On the other hand, though, there's something positive about this, which is none of us, I think, that are listening here certainly want to shame teachers. Want to shame our students. 90% of us, 90% of us when polled in this survey that was done, said that there was a teacher who taught us, who believed in us enough where we saw something in ourselves that changed us for life. And mine was Miss Berger in high school, and it was public speaking, which I was afraid of. And I was like, I might literally, I wish, I keep trying to find her on the internet because she changed my life. And I think of kids I've taught, is my proudest moment is not anything with regard to what I've accomplished. It's when I get those emails on Facebook from English learners I taught years ago, and they remember you because you were that teacher that encouraged them. And I think one of the things we have to remember with social emotional learning is that it starts with us, with strengthening us, because social emotional learning is caught more than it's taught. It's when we have those skills with our kids, they pick it up from us. When we show this kind of a listening posture and respect and saying how we feel and our vulnerability to try something different in front of our students, then they're able to do all of those things as well. And so part of what we're going to talk about today is what we can do for our kids, but we're also going to talk about what we can do for us so that we're able to be available for our English learners. So we're going to start with a poll. Are you ready, Ben? See, this is vulnerability for me. We're experimenting here. Okay. So
everyone should be able to see the poll now. Hopefully that's true.
So it says the idea of promoting, so we're going to just kind of access some prior knowledge here, see what everybody knows. The idea of promoting social and emotional competencies began in the 2000s with No Child Left Behind, B in the 1990s with CASEL, C in the 1980s with A Nation at Risk, or D in the 1970s with the Bee Gees. What do you think?
We are seeing the responses roll in. Here, the poll's been open for about 40 seconds. John, would you like a live update? Sort of like a.
You know what? Give me the update in a minute. I'll go ahead and kind of talk you through this just a little bit. If you think about the 2000s, well, yeah, give me a live update, Ben. Where are we?
Sure. Well, we're it's a pretty even split right now with in the 2000s with No Child Left Behind, B with CASEL, and C with A Nation at Risk. That's all about 33% or so.
Nobody says the Bee Gees. Come on, guys.
There are some. There are about 3% of folks. So maybe some Bee Gees fans here like myself.
Okay. So actually, it began in the 1990s with the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. That was when it started. It was in the 1990s. There was this idea floating in the air, and it really kind of deepened with Daniel Goldman about doing what they called emotional intelligence. And there are lots of different things people were calling it, your EQ. You guys might remember some of this stuff that was out there at the time. But when I really jumped into the teaching profession was after the Nation at Risk. When I started teaching in the 90s, it was all this, kids aren't able to read. And so there's a big focus on reading and math skills, and then became accountability and assessment. And we started that in Texas and Kentucky, and then blessed the whole nation with it, with No Child Left Behind. And the focus was academic, your academic skills. And then in the 90s, we started to realize, hey, there's something being left out here, that there were social and emotional skills. And CASEL, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, Emotional Learning, they became the premier leaders. And if you look in the Padlet, you will find a link to CASEL, which are I guess you'd say the kings of social emotional learning in the United States right now. Tons of resources that you'll have available. They're on their website to implement things at different levels within your districts. Wherever you are, if you're just starting, it's a good place to start. Or if you're trying to deepen or really get some rubrics and see how well you're doing, they've got tons of resources there that can help you with that. And the second was, according to CASEL, social emotional learning is a process that involves, what do you think? Bum, 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 bum. Managing emotions, feeling and showing empathy for others, establishing and maintaining supportive relationship, or the Bee Gees? No, or all of the above. This one's a little easier than the first one, right?
It's looking like all of the above with a resounding 96% so far in this poll.
Okay, cool. I hope you had a chance to vote there. Actually, yes, social emotional learning it's a process, but when at the Fetzer Institute, when they were developing the concept, there was a real focus on calling it learning. It's a process, but calling it learning because these are skills. These are things you can get better at. And it's not just something, there's kind of an illusion sometimes that we have in teaching that if we memorize and test on it, I had that about language development. I used to think before I really learned anything about language development, when I started as an ESL teacher, I could just teach the kids the whole list of adjectives or irregular English verbs. They'd pass a test on it, then they could use because we did a test on it, right? Now you can use them. Social emotional learning is the same way. It's not just about memorizing a bunch of different emotions and identifying them on a page. It's about implementing a program where these things are put into practice on your campus and they become skills that you can that you live with. So here's the classic circle for social emotional learning that if you've got a little background with it, you might have seen before, including self-awareness. Whoa, I'm going all over the place. Self-awareness, responsible decision-making, relationship skills, social awareness, and self-management. So let's think a little bit now about where you are in your own districts. Where are you in your SEL in your districts? What's been going on in your districts? How far along are you with it? Oh, oops, sorry.
Sorry there, John. I appear to not have those right poll questions for you, but I can edit them real quick.
Just write it into the chat. Go ahead and write it into the chat. How far along are you on it? Type it into the chat. District-wide curriculum. Teachers have integrated it into their curriculum. You're just getting started. Well, it's looking from the chat that it's all over the place. We have some people with a district-wide curriculum, some people just getting started, some people have not yet begun one. Okay, excellent. Okay, so let's talk specifically now about English language learners and some of the challenges that they're facing. What do you think of on this one? Health, economic, and educational challenges of COVID are disproportionately affecting immigrant students. What do you think about that? What's the poll showing, Ben?
The poll, this one, which is working, has 96% true and 4% false, with about 68% of the conference here voting.
From what we can tell right now, and there's some articles about this that are linked to in the Padlet to Colorín Colorado, that it does seem as though that our immigrant populations are being disproportionately affected negatively by the COVID crisis. And I have a video here. This is Nathaniel Provencio, the Associate Superintendent of Prince William County Schools in Manassas, Virginia. This video is on the Padlet. It's also linked from Colorín Colorado, and we have just started working with Prince William County Schools recently. I don't know if you guys are working with them.
Some of our largest immigrant community.
I wanted to give you a chance to watch this. So Ben, can you give me a thumbs up if this is you guys can hear this and it's working right?
Some of our largest immigrant communities were very heavily hit with coronavirus. Family, multiple generations living in homes, parents still having to go out into the field and work, like you talked about, even students and older students being able to work. These families didn't necessarily have access to healthcare, or maybe felt scared about getting testing, or thought that there was a nexus between testing and surveillance and being targeted. And so schools definitely had a place in being able to communicate that people were safe, and that these are where you can get testing, and this is where you can have access to resources if you can. So schools do have a place to make sure that we can communicate that. It's hard, and not everything should fall on the schools. But what I found is that so often families are closer to the schools and to their teachers and to their principals. That relationship is tighter than almost any other relationship, right? And that's who they go to. We also need to be prepared for the social and emotional well-being of students when they come in. It's, we're not just looking at, language needs, and students have and families have very nuanced challenges that we need to be prepared for. We need to make sure that when we're looking at our curriculum, that our curriculum is taught in a way and delivered in a way that relates to our students, regardless of where they're coming from, we need to be prepared for these challenges.
Sorry. Okay, so I think it's important for us as teachers of ELs. A lot of times we have in place, we have social emotional learning. A lot of you put A, that you had a curriculum in place, or you've just started. Some of you weren't getting started at all. So in preparing for this, I was trying to think, if I was going to talk to a few hundred people and we're all at different levels, I really thought of thinking about what are some things that could be takeaways and think abouts for all of us at whatever phase we're in. And one of them is, like the example of Pam Broussard, is that all of us, and I'm including myself and my team in this, we just need to keep our eyes and ears open to the emotional needs of our English learners in this trying time in particular. And I know we've got them and our kids got them, but it's being aware of those specific things. And I wanted to really think about this for a second in the context of COVID and the crisis that we're going through socially and emotionally with COVID. And here's a little cartoon about the stages of grief for there's a little bear suffering a little bit. Well, when we think about stages of grief, there's Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Anybody heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross? And David Kessler. Well, it was originally Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did the original research, and later she co-published with, co-authored with David Kessler, talking about the different stages of grief. And there's been some writing done on this. And in the Padlet, there's an article that I'll show you in a little bit that was in Harvard Business Weekly. But David Kessler, one of the co-authors of the stages of grief, has been talking about the kinds of grief that we're going through because of COVID. If you think about the things, think about the loss of airports, the loss of our of restaurants to hang out in, the loss of our friends, the loss of hugging our grandparents. That this is really hard, and kids who haven't been able to see relatives, to be with them at these times, it's really, really challenging. And when you're dealing with the other issues of linguistic and racial prejudice, combined with lack of access to resources, and then fear of, kids are struggling with fear of, can I go, is it safe for me to go to the hospital? Is it safe for me to go get tested? These are some of the struggles that our kids are going through. But I think as COVID struck, we kind of went through these different phases. I think first we had denial. We're like, nope, it's going to be over. 15 days to flatten the curve. Do y'all remember that, right? We're like, this is not going to happen to us. We're all just fine. And then the next phase that we went through, by the way, when we say phases, David Kessler is the first to point out, these aren't necessarily linear. They call them stages, but you can go back into denial, which I think I do every time I drop the kids off at school and everybody's with their masks on, right? But they're not necessarily linear. Bargaining. It's like, okay, how are we going to do this? Is there some way we can get out of this? Is there really? I have to wear a mask. I have to wear it all the time. Really? And then getting angry. And then finally, we get to where we're like, okay, this just is awful. This is really, really terrible. And finally, he talks about moving into acceptance. Okay, got my mask. I'm going to be teaching. I got my plexiglass here. I've got my internet hookup. I'm doing good here. Everything's going well for me. I got it, right? The one thing that was new to me when I read the article about the stages of grief with COVID was a new phase that David Kessler's been talking about, which sometimes comes after that, which is meaning, finding meaning, which is something that I hadn't really thought about. But I thought about, just a situation I went through before in my own struggle dealing with COVID, with Seidlitz Education, and kind of what we've gone through. I had a student once named Amy, and Amy I taught in Floresville, and she was one of those awkward sort of kids where just a little bit kind of socially awkward 8th grader who I'm sure a lot of us have taught. And it's one of those kids that I got really attached to. And that year, I was teaching speech theater arts, and she really came out of her shell and got really attached to her and to her friend Brenda. And we were like, one of those kids you really get into. And then the year afterwards, when she was a 9th grader, I was still teaching 8th grade, not 9th grade, but she was hit by a drunk driver not too far from the campus and died. And I remember when that first happened, like having trouble going on with teaching. There was a feeling of, why am I doing this? How can I do this when this has happened? And I really struggled with that for a while. Like what was all that about? Why is she learning English? Why is she doing all of this when this happens? And then I had kids who didn't graduate, or who got one of students who did really well in high school and did great, and they couldn't get to college because they didn't have adequate documentation. Or, I mean, there were so many situations as a teacher that I started to get exposed to. I was so sheltered as a military kid growing up on a military Air Force bases overseas. I didn't see this kind of suffering kids were going through. And I started feeling like, what's the point? And what I realized eventually was, and David Kessler talks about that, and it's linked to in the Padlet, it was never going to be meaningful that happened to her. That never was the case. Or some of the things that have happened to some of our students is not meaningful that happening. But what is meaningful is that even in the middle of all of this, we can provide a little bit of joy, and we can provide a little bit of hope, and we can give kids skills and give them experiences where they can transcend those circumstances, where they can actually serve other people and they can be helpful for other people. I heard recently has anybody ever heard the long spoons? Well, you know what, I'll do the long spoon story later. Let me jump into this quote first, because I'm running out of time here. Okay, I'm gonna put a quote up here. This is from David Kessler, and type into the chat, please, which phrase stands out to you in the following quote. Just type into the chat. Jordan, what are you thinking about? What stands out to you from the quote?
I'm making a little bit of a connection between what you just said about your student, where something bad happened and you wondered, is this worth it? And this idea that's happening kind of on a mass scale with a loss of safety. And that's the kind of phrase that stands out for me. And what that does to students' kind of motivation or sense of proactivity, like how do you persist when you're not feeling safe? It's difficult enough when a teacher has done something that shames you. That's small. I mean, it could be large, but that's somewhat micro. When your whole world is somewhat upside down and you are not feeling safe, it is quite easy, and I'm sure we're all feeling it, to kind of say, like, what does the rest of this matter? I just got to get through the day. So that's what resonated the most for me, John.
Thank you. I think that I'm seeing in the chat, I just clicked on it just for a second, that the sense of safety, the sense of loss. And I always think that, whenever we're going through, our kids are going through it too. I heard this story about before. It's sort of like I guess a parable or something, but it's called The Long Spoons. And you may have heard this before. It's kind of like one of those things that just floats around. But there were two different dinners. This guy has a dream, and he goes in two different rooms. And he goes in the first rooms, and these people all have these soup bowls, and they're in front of these soup bowls, and they're eating with these spoons. But the spoons are so long, they can't get the soup into their mouth, and they're all miserable, right? He's just really, he sees the people with these long spoons, and the spoons are too long, so they're just spilling all over the place, and they're screaming and yelling, "Who brought us these spoons, these stupid spoons?" And he goes in the other room, and there's the same soup, a different group of people, but they're just laughing, having a good time, and he realized when he goes in the other room, they're all feeding each other. They took those long spoons, they're feeding each other because he couldn't really feed themselves. And I think for us as teachers, like I think about Pam when I talked to her, and she was really hurting and struggling with COVID and with her family and her fears about the situation. But she still has to take that spoon and reach out and feed the other kids and the other teachers on her team and her campus. It's one of those things to think about, that this is hard for all of us, but we just kind of have two choices. We can kind of be available and be helpful and think, where can we be of service? Or we can shrink. And I think what I'm seeing teachers do is absolutely amazing, is that we're not. Anyway, the article about that discomfort you're feeling is grief, is linked up to in the Padlet.
Hey, John,
yes, go ahead.
I just want, so I know you're going to get into some things that we can kind of say and do for our students. Yeah. You may also, one of the things that's great about having 400 people on is to crowdsource a little bit. So I would just encourage you all to think about and maybe drop into the chat one of two things. One, what else, similar to what John is presenting, you've done? But also, John, you said earlier, like, we have to start with ourselves. maybe what else you're doing for yourself that puts you in a position to be able to be there for English learners in the way that John's going to present. So I just want to kind of, to the degree we can, with 400 people on and all across the country, hear from you all and just make sure that we're benefiting from the collective wisdom of the 400 people on the Zoom.
Well, do you know something, Jordan, that I started doing a few weeks ago was I started scheduling more time for calls if I have to talk to another teacher or talk to somebody who's teaching or working directly with kids or to administrators, because realizing that people aren't just going to want to talk about work. And then I've had to realize this too. I have this tendency to cut people off and call it complaining when they're talking about real trouble they're having. I've had to shut off that instinct and let people talk a little bit. And then learn by shutting that, oddly enough, I felt like doing that has helped me to feel better, because I don't feel like that rushed feeling like I got to get through this. Jordan, we talked before at a conference about how rushed we are all the time, but we've had to slow down. If nothing else, this has helped us to slow down. Thank you, those of you who are sharing stuff that you're doing in the chat. That was a great question, Jordan. So I want to talk about, we're getting into what do we do specifically for ELs, specifically. Now the 4 messages to send ELs, I've been doing these 4 messages since I guess 2004, but I think now more than ever, it's really important that we think concretely. And what I do with districts with this, and you may have been, so we got some Texas districts here, I may have done this with your district. I have you game it out. I put out their little chart and you think and you brainstorm. And I would really recommend getting with your EL team and brainstorming, how can we do this during COVID? We want to send 4 messages to our English learners. And it's concrete means, is it going to be calling? Is it going to be getting them a native language resources? Is it going to be communicating to parents? How are we going to do it? Making it concrete. But the first one is, you are important. That it's so much easier face-to-face sometimes to get the eye contact, to get those things. We have 120 kids. We're communicating online. We're tired, but figuring out how are we going to communicate to kids who might not necessarily speak our language. How do we communicate with them and say, you are important, and show them that? The second one is, what we are learning is important. And it might be important to your long-term goals, or sometimes it's important just because I'm going to share with you some lessons I would do before when I taught social studies in ESL. I sometimes feel I'm not just teaching English, I'm teaching life here, right? And so it would become a vehicle to teach kids how to work together, how to listen to each other, how to have empathy with each other. That's some of the things that we were learning, in addition to learning English and learning United States history or whatever it is that we were teaching. But sometimes the US history was important. I mean, we're learning that right now, right? Government lessons are a little important, right? That what we're learning is important and it does matter. And one time I asked a teacher, they told me, what I'm teaching just really isn't that important. How do I get to where I think it's important? I said, well, you got 2 choices. You can figure out why it's important or teach something else. Because if you don't think it's important, they're not going to think it's important. Another one is you can do it. And boy, I've been put in my place about this recently over the last few years. Prior to 5 years ago, I would have thought if a student got here and couldn't read in their native language and they're in 8th grade, my goal would have been that they would become literate and able to read in English and able to be employable. I mean, that's a horrible thing to say, but that was my vision because I'd never seen it. Kids come that couldn't read in their native language, that didn't have literacy skills. But now I've seen some of the first I saw were some of Carol Salva's students over in Spring Branch, but now other people across the country, kids coming and doing it. We don't know what they can do. And so we're better off believing they can than they can't. And the most important thing is, how do we communicate that to them? Carol Salva always says to her kids, you can do hard things. I've seen you do hard things. You've already done hard things. I know you can do this. It's how are we going to communicate that to our kids? And final message is, we will not give up on you. Is how are we going to communicate to our English learners that we are not giving up on them, that is not going to happen, that this is going to be something we're going to really focus on. And then we also want to empower our kids is to, how do we facilitate them communicating those messages to each other? We need to provide venues where they can show the other kids in the classroom, hey, you're important. Hey, what you're learning is important. You can do it. I'm not going to give up on you, those kinds of things. So here are 4 essential practices to think about in working with our English language learners that we want to take with us. One of them is smile. Oops, I'm sorry, didn't mean to click that. Whoa. Sorry, there we go. Okay, so one of ours is smile behind the mask. We want to make sure that I love that Bitmoji when I saw it, because there was that smile there. You know, you can smile with your eyes. I was, Dr. Latta was recently working in, oh, was it Edinburgh? I don't remember. It was a school in the Rio Grande Valley where she was working recently at Harlingen. It's Harlingen ISD. And she was, she was just telling me that some of the teachers just would smile with their eyes down there, that she could see their eyes smiling. And that really touched me. And I thought, we can smile behind the screen, we can smile behind the mask, but kids can feel that kind of a welcoming spirit that we may have. Here's another thing we want to do for our ELs. We want to connect with their families. I think Pam's strength in that situation where her student was depressed and vulnerable. I know here in Dallas, there was a statistic recently where I live in Irving, right near the Dallas area, of the increase in teen suicide since COVID started. Teenage girl suicide since COVID started was what they were looking at specifically. There was an article in the Dallas Morning News about it. Oh, it's not in the Padlet. I should have put it in there for you guys. But her reaching out, you don't know when you're saving a life by reaching out to kids. And so I put in here a link. You may have seen this before. If you're already using this in your district, you might put a shout out in the text, but it's called Talking Points. And what Talking Points is, it's a nonprofit that has created this software for you to communicate with families in their home language. And it's real, for me, it's like real futuristic and Star Trek-y. I mean, you text and type in your, in what you want to say in English, and then the families who are logged into the program, they receive the message in their native language. And it is not perfect, the translation, I've been told, but it's certainly forgivable, and it's mejor que nada, as they say. You know, you really don't want to, you don't want to throw something out because it's not perfect, and it's just really making a big impact. If anybody's using it and wants to do a shout out, or, okay, good. Those of you using it, do not be afraid of that, right? Somebody's got Remind 101. Good, thank you guys who are using the software. I get nothing from them. I'm just letting you know this is available for you, because right now communicating with families really is not an option. I mean, it's required that we get a hold of them, we maintain that relationship with their parents. So a big part of social emotional learning is building empathy and building understanding. And so I want to talk about a couple of things. There's 3 pictures there, but it's actually only 2 things that I'm going to talk about, which are letting ELs share who they are. This is not just good for the English learners, it's also really, really good for the other kids. I just glanced at the chat, which I said I wasn't going to do, but I'm seeing other people are sharing other great resources, which people can also use for that, for district translation with the teachers. You know, I'm going to go back to the translation in a minute. See, I just did that thing I'm not supposed to do.
Hey, John,
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to highlight, because the chat will start, we'll lose things so quickly because people are typing. There is a Highest Aspirations podcast that you can get off of our website with the founder of Talking Point. So that will give you even more insight into kind of one of these apps that is being used really widely and apparently to great effect by a lot of the people on this Zoom.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. I didn't know that, Jordan. And I always, that's in my download feed. I didn't catch that one with the founder of Talking Points.
I feel like I'm doing a commercial, like wherever you get your podcast.
So what I wanted to share about that was, a lot of times, I know we have a lot of ESL teachers, and a lot of this stuff is preaching to the choir, but let your teachers know about these resources. Sometimes there's something like a district will have the resource, but content area teachers or new teachers, different people, they don't know it's available. So it's really important that all the stakeholders know and can communicate with their parents. Another one here is Inclusive Schools Network. This is about letting ELs share who they are, to build empathy, to build understanding. And the way I've heard it before was, I don't remember where this originally comes from. Someone can type into the chat if they know, but it was having kids need mirrors and windows. They need mirrors and windows. And the mirrors are where kids can see themselves reflected in what they are reading. And the windows are where they can see out onto the world. And that's the beauty of having English learners in your classrooms, is that you get the opportunity to do that. And one place to look is the Inclusive Schools Network. They have some great resources. This is linked to in the Padlet for, if you go to the resources, they have tons of books for kids from every social, economic, nationality. They have books that just reflect the great diversity of the American population. Short books, little picture books. And I read picture books sometimes, like Eve Bunting's The Wall, different ones with my students when they were 8th graders, and they loved them. I mean, you get a good emotional picture book. It can be powerful even with older kids. But they also have long books, novels, different things you could read with your kids. But what do you do once you read that? I mean, you can read it and have a discussion. I linked in the Padlet an activity that I used to do with my 8th graders. and I did this in social studies, but I also would do it in language arts. It's called Letter to a Protagonist. So let's say you just read Enrique's journey, and I know you guys had Sonia on your podcast too. I think, right? You guys had her on the podcast. You didn't have Harriet Tubman though. I know that, right? You didn't have Sonia Nazato though, but she, you write to the kids, read and learn about Enrique, or they learn about Harriet Tubman, and they write a letter to them, and they say, "I admire you because I'm similar to you in that, I'm different from you in that, and I want you to know." And I know that, like, I have done this myself. I usually, when I'm going to have kids do this, I write it myself, and I try to just put myself out there and be vulnerable and be real. Like, what is similar? What is different? But this is a great way to build like cross-cultural understanding in your classroom, is if you're reading a book about somebody who represents kids who are in your class, and then the kids have to think through, what do I have common with them? What is different from me about Enrique is also what's different for them about Leticia, about Raquel, about other kids who you've got in your classroom. And they're going to see that what's similar to me about Waqas from Pakistan and what's different from me. And literature can be a great venue for doing that. It was always a powerful emotional experience when we would do those letters. So and that's also linked to in your, in the Padlet. So I wanted to mention another thing too. We're still on the idea here of letting ELs share who they are, is, if you're not familiar, if anybody's familiar with Noah Daniel, you can do a shout out to Noah Daniel in the chat. She does the building outside the blocks, but they're great activities, tons of ideas. And I'm just going to share one with you. And this is what her podcast is based on, this called the Personal Playlist. If y'all haven't had her, she'd be a good one for you guys to get on Highest Aspirations, Jordan. But she has this one activities. They're all activities for kids to get student voice, for them to get their voice out there. And this is just my favorite. It's one that's really popular, called the Personal Playlist. And the Personal Playlist is where, you know what, I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm just going to first do one, and then we'll talk about it. You can see one. This is one of a student, one of Carol's students, Carol Salva's students, in doing the Personal Playlist. She's a high school student, and she's going to share some songs that represent her to you.
I could feel alone while they sang the freedom of my country. Despierto con la mente adolorida. These people tell us things like, I love you, baby. And this song tells us things like, I don't think I know these pieces. It's about a man asking if it's wrong to want to get ahead. He was born in Africa and he wanted to reach his goals. I say like, if one thing I know is I will go and I will grow. Go to roll and don't look back. Always do what you decide. Don't let them conquer you.
So the idea there of letting ELs share who they are, I love the idea of a nostalgia, an identity song, and a personal motivator. It's a really fun thing to do, to get kids to do that, to kind of share those. And you get the insights. You know, after I first heard about this, because I never did this with my kids when I was in teaching, it kind of, Noah Daniel came out after I did that. But I immediately did it with my own children at the table. I was like, okay, I want to know, what's your personal motivator? What's your nostalgia song? What's your identity? And then, of course, they asked back. I'm going to put Jordan on the spot. Jordan, do you have an identity song?
John, I was actually going to put in the chat that if I asked my teenagers at the dinner table to put in their identity song, it might be like the last dinner we have together. I gotta think of how to use this as a tool in my own house in a way that kind of keeps them engaged and doesn't have them resist and rebel.
You could always just ask for their favorite song, their current favorite song.
That is true.
Actually, I think I started with the personal motivator, Jordan. So,
the only thing I would say, as you were going, I'm not sure it's one of nostalgia, but I would say over this last weekend or this last week, with all kind of things about democracy, the soundtrack of Hamilton has been kind of.
Oh my gosh, yes, yeah. Wow, okay, that's mine now this week. That's great. I'm glad you just said that one. That's really cool. I always thought my nostalgia song would be Rayando el Sol from Maná, which is because I always think of listening to that with my wife and my extended family in the backyard, just chilling out, listening to Maná would be my nostalgia song. Anyways, so let's go ahead and jump up and do the last thing here, which was letting ELs share how they are doing. And some of you don't have, I mean, if you look at the lesson flow from Castle, where they talk about setting up your lesson to promote social emotional learning, they talk about having welcoming rituals and then having lots of interaction, and then an optimistic close is a really important part of just the way you structure your time together with someone. And I think having welcoming things, they could be things that if you can't use your breakout rooms, I know a lot of districts can't, you can always use Flipgrid or Seesaw or something where kids just check in, and they can have a check-in partner who's going to just respond to their Flipgrid, and you can assign them or you could rotate them. But having kids do just a check-in, you don't have to necessarily check these every day. You could check them once a week, like I used to do with journals when I was teaching history. They filled out the journals every day, and one random time a week I would check them. Because some of us are feeling overwhelmed, like, oh my gosh, I got 110 kids. How am I going to check 120 Flipgrids? Well, the answer is you don't have to. But it can be a way for them to communicate with each other and to check in emotionally with each other and physically and just where they're at. I think it's a really important part of what we're doing, but it also builds the skill of empathy because Jordan, you mentioned your teenagers not wanting to talk about their song, but the lack of I'm going to go off because I just had a little argument yesterday with a 15-year-old, but sometimes teenagers can be a little bit self-centered, just a hair, right? Is that the case? Just a little bit focused on themselves. But by checking in with somebody with a really sincere, one thing that's going well for me, one thing I'm struggling with another kid it's just a great way for them to build empathy, especially cross-culturally and in different ways where they can communicate with somebody who's not necessarily exactly like them. Okay, so, cool. People are writing in their songs onto the chat. So I wanted to, and I know I'm almost out of time here, I wanted to share with you from Dr. Monica Lara, from her book, Toma la Palabra. She adapted the 4 essential messages. And I want to tell you why, because I know we've got some bilingual teachers out there. Sometimes it's just it really, really frustrates me, and it frustrates Dr. Lara, but bilingual teachers and bilingual programs and dual language programs, we feel like second-class citizens, the teachers down the hall. Or if you're in a district that doesn't have a large number of English learners and you have an ESL pull-out program, or you are their English teacher, or you're working with ELs, or you're in the sheltered program and the kids are tracked, or different situations, we sometimes feel like we're the second-class teachers, and that's just not the case. And one of the most important things for bilingual teachers to do and teachers of English learners is to stand up and be counted, because this is the future. You know, America is the second largest Spanish-speaking country on planet Earth. It goes Mexico, then us, then Spain. Okay, so this is a bilingual country. It is a multilingual country. And we're on the front lines of making the American dream happen every day in our classrooms. And we need to stand up and be counted and realize what we're doing matters and it's important. And so one of the first things she says is, lo que sé es importante. What I know is important. What I know as a teacher is important. And the second one is, what I teach is important. Whether it's sheltered history or sheltered math or English as a new language, or I'm in a bilingual program, what I'm teaching matters. It matters today. There may not be a tomorrow. It matters today because I can share joy and energy and learning and knowledge and wisdom with you today in my classroom. And what I'm teaching to you really matters. And the third one is, I have what I need to be successful. Tengo lo necesario para el éxito. I have it. It's all right here. It's inside me, and it's all among us in our community. I have this. And finally, the last one that we have here is, I will not give up on myself. No me daré por vencida. I'm not going to give up on myself. That I'm going to hang in there and I'm going to do it. Now, one of the reasons why we need to hang up on ourselves. I'm sorry, hang up on ourselves, not give up on ourselves. One of the reasons we need to not give up on ourselves is because our kids aren't giving up on us. And even those teenagers, I'm sorry that I'm a secondary person. I probably talk too much as secondary teachers, but you know, they get those eye rolls and the and all of that kind of stuff, and they act like they don't want to be there, but we are still on a pedestal for them. And they see us struggling. They see how hard this has been for us. And you know what? They appreciate it. They appreciate the effort that we're making, whether they say it or show it or not, but sometimes they do show it. So I wanted to share with you something from, and kind of close with this, from SciFair ISD. And this is, thank you, Andra Day. Anybody know who she is, for sharing this with us. They put this together for their teachers about their feelings during the COVID crisis about them right now.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round. You can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we can walk it out. Ooh, mountains, we can walk it out, and mountains, and I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I'll like the waves, I'll rise up, in spite of the ache, I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. The silence is quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Ooh, mountains, bring it to its feet. Ooh, mountains, and I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up, I'll rise unafraid, I'll rise up, and I do it 1,000 times again. All we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other, and we will rise, we will rise, we will rise, we'll rise.
Thank you.
I want to just take 1 minute. I want to thank John. If it wasn't clear, you can get a sense of what kind of teacher and educator and presenter he is, and the amount that he cares about the work that all of you are doing and the students you are serving. I want to remind you there are additional sessions as part of the EL Impact Conference over the course of the week. Please join us. How awesome to be on with 400, 500, 600 colleagues from around the country. And we just want to thank all of you for the incredible work you're doing. So thank you, and we look forward to seeing you over the course of the week.
And I want to let everybody know, I repasted the link into the Padlet a few times so that people can, the video is in the Padlet, and it's SciFair ISD. It's the one that says "We are important" right down here.
We'll also
Awesome.
send a Padlet with the recording of the video, so you'll all have that once we move into that recording session and send things out to you all afterwards.
Thank you. I miss you guys. I wish I really want to go visit. I want to get back with teachers. I want to go to a conference.
All right, what a great note to finish on.
Thank you, everybody. We miss you too, John. I think I can speak for all my colleagues when I say that was very moving and very informative for everybody. Thanks to all our attendees for joining. Hope we can see you at other sessions for the rest of EL Impact this week. In the meantime, sincerely hope you have a great day. And thank you again for your time and attention. We'll be following up with the recording and some of the other resources that John's mentioned throughout the presentation as soon as possible once we can get everything done and edited at the end. So once again, have a great afternoon, or I guess it is the afternoon everywhere, unless you're in Alaska or Hawaii, in which case it's still a morning, or perhaps even some more of the Pacific territories. So we'll see you soon, everybody, and thanks again.